The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library. Hello and welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor. Our topic today is the SAT and the ACT test and how to prepare for them. Our guests are Patrick McNamara, he's Executive Director of Sylvan Learning, and Carla Giovanniello, Director of Education. I'm really happy to have you here.
Good afternoon.
Happy to see you.
Great. Let's start out a little bit by talking about Sylvan Learning so that we know your background and why you're here to talk about the ACT and the SAT. That's kind of a major thing that you do, but let's give an overview of Sylvan Learning.
Sure. So Sylvan Learning is a national company that's been around for over 35 years. Sylvan Learning in the Capital District has been in business for more than 20 years. We provide educational services to children from kindergarten through 12th grade. We provide a wide variety of programs. We provide the traditional tutoring program, which we call homework support, but we also provide other programs. We have a reading program, a math program, a writing program, the ACT and SAT prep program, which we're going to talk about mostly today.
Right.
And then we also have Regents Prep.
Okay.
So that's basically what the range of the programs. Sylvan's educational programs are very personalized. So the programs really address what the students' weaknesses are, and that's partly what we do with the SAT and ACT.
Great. So that kind of, it's not like the whole school that you're doing. You're looking at where there's a specific problem and you're helping get the kid up to speed.
Exactly. We are focused on what that student needs. I often give the example that in a class, the teacher has 20 to 30 or more kids, and their goal for the class work is to get a majority of the kids. They want to get all the kids, but if they get a majority of kids who understand what she's been teaching and really grasp it, then the class moves on. Unfortunately, some kids really didn't understand what was going on. And the teacher may later on try to pick it up, but there's always some kids who just never mastered it. The problem is that's just not one day. That goes on day after day. And then the problem is it goes on year after year.
It's compounded.
It is. And so a good example is a lot of times kids do okay in math, and then they get to 9th grade and it's algebra, and everything screeches to a halt, and they just don't get it. And our program would identify that what the problem often is, which is they never really mastered fractions. And fractions was something they should have mastered years before. Well, the 9th grade teacher isn't teaching fractions anymore. If you haven't mastered it, she'll do her best, but that's not her focus. If you come to Sylvan, we'll identify that as really the foundational problem for why you're having troubles in algebra, teach you that, now you're ready to actually be able to embrace the complexity that algebra has.
Super. And Carla, kind of that's your specialty, is the education component. What do you do?
Absolutely. So as Director of Education, I oversee all of the student programs. I'm constantly tracking progress and monitoring student instructional hours, making modifications as needed. I'm also one of the individuals that administers that first initial diagnostic when the family comes through our doors. That way I can do my job, which one of my responsibilities is finding the best fit program to meet the student needs. And then, uncovering needs as we progress through the program. So
super. That's a big job.
Yeah.
A lot of responsibility.
Keeps me busy. Keeps me busy.
So as you said, Patrick, we're going to talk mostly about the ACT and the SAT part. Mm-hmm. Let's kind of set the stage, kind of like what they are.
Sure. Do you want to handle that, or
the SAT and the ACT are going to be the exams that students start thinking about in 11th grade. These are going to be the exams that colleges are going to look at, and the college entry exams. We can refer to them as college entry exams.
Now, the SAT is different from the ACT, right? And We're going to talk about why you would take one or the other, but why do we have two?
Yeah, there are several differences between the ACT and the SAT. Aside from how many components each test has, for example, the SAT is going to have 9 components or 9 sections, including the essay. The ACT is going to have 5, including the essay, which is optional. The SAT, the main difference here is the SAT is going to be more of an aptitude test, and the ACT is going to be more of an achievement test. So it's going to look at what the student has accomplished in their high school experience.
So when you say that, it makes me think that the SAT is a little closer to an IQ test, but what kind of questions would that be? Because it's hard for me to imagine asking a question and it's not based on the knowledge that they had built up.
Well, some of the skills they should have worked on in high school. It is supposed to give more of an idea of what a student's abilities are, how they'll handle the college environment is our traditional outlook of the SAT. And it does cover content area that was learned in high school, but there's just some differences in content. So the SAT is going to cover through geometry. The ACT is going to go through trigonometry. The ACT is also going to have a science portion. So that really is going to be the difference between content areas. I wouldn't necessarily think of the SAT as an IQ test,
right,
but there's some more reading comprehension, vocabulary-based questions, that type of content that will be tested, which maybe it wasn't taught outright in high school.
Okay. So maybe we should talk about how do you know which one to take? When you're in the 11th grade, do they say we're having ACT then and we're having SAT then and take one you want? Or
no, they deciding which test to take is tough because there are so many factors that go into it. The first and probably the most important factors is that certain colleges do have preferences. In fact, some colleges have requirements. And so if students and parents really know that their child is going to be focused on certain schools, they should go onto those schools' websites to figure out which which test, the ACT or the SAT, that school wants. Most schools don't have a strong preference. They'll accept both.
Okay.
In which case you go to another factor, which is, as Carla said, the ACT has science. If you know you're really strong in science, you may want to focus on the ACT because it gives you an opportunity to show that you really have some achievement.
Your
in science,
strength, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and especially students that are interested in possibly getting into the medical field, a lot of times they'll want to highlight their background knowledge in science, in some of the higher level math. So that's another reason why that test might appeal.
And this is to get into a bachelor's level program.
Right.
So it's not like you're going to Harvard Medical School at this point.
No, but it's planning ahead, and that I think is the important piece. I
Right.
think that's why we're here today,
Right.
to talk about the importance of
Right.
planning. Yeah.
So the SAT and ACT, I think you have to think of it as it's part of the college's screening process. And that's why it's important to do well. Because if you think about some of the very big universities, they're getting tens of thousands of applications. And they have to screen out. They're going to look at every one, but they can't look at every single application very, very closely. So one of the ways they do that is they look at your grades and they look at your SAT, ACT scores. And they will set some sort of internal minimum saying, well, if you're not over this score, we're probably going to assume you're not right for this place. And the programs are really designed to try to maximize your score.
Okay.
And that's why people take prep programs for that, because that score is important. It's not the be all and end all of what schools are going to look at, but it is an important part of their evaluation.
Go into a little bit more about the range. Let's say you're going to a state school, an in-state school versus an out-of-state school. That would be easier, right? The qualification would be lower because their mandate is
Right.
take a lot of people.
I think it really depends on the schools. I know a lot of the state of New York schools, yeah, the average is a little bit lower, but at the same time, they're still looking for that number. They're still looking for achievement. Yeah, they're able to accept a wider population. But again, as Patrick was saying, it's a screening tool. So it's going to help them solidify their decision about what students to accept and what students to reject. But yes, that score is going to be a little bit higher. You look at some of the more competitive schools, and you're going to be looking at like the 98th, 99th percentile in score.
Right. So, you know, I looked, for example, SUNY Albany, their average score is about in the 500s on math and verbal.
And those add together?
They get added together, plus there's another portion added. So, but my point was going to be that SUNY Albany will have a certain average, and then Harvard, for example, will have people in the high 700s out of a possible 800. So the range is big, so you have to understand. Now, as students are going through the process, this is usually something they understand that it's important to do well on the SAT and ACT. They will be looking at schools. The schools all have websites. There are other websites out there that aggregate some of these numbers so that you can say, okay, here's where my scores are, here, and you can quickly find, here are schools where I would be right in the middle.
Okay.
And here's some schools where I might be a little bit on the edge. You know, most students, when they apply, they're applying to some reach schools where their numbers are maybe not exactly what the average kid has at that school, but they're close enough so they think like maybe the rest of my application will get me in. They have regular schools where they say, okay, these I'm competitive. It's not a reach, but it's not a given. And then most students also apply to a safety school where like my numbers are great. For that school. And you have to think about it, because if you're an average student and you go to Harvard and you're competing against the kids who all end up at the top of their class, is that really a place you want to be in? And the schools themselves, that's why they have the screening. They don't want to set their students up to fail. So they know they want those students to be comfortable academically with their fellow students.
Right. And I guess I was looking at it a little wrongly. It's not like a bar that you want to just manage to get over without knocking it down. You know, you'd just as soon sail right over.
Yeah, you want to have some variety, absolutely. You want to, I think that was a good way to put it. That's really the way that we tell students to plan is you want to have some reach schools where you're working a little harder, and you know, it's not guaranteed. You want to have some schools on your list that, you know, it's a safe zone for you. And then your safety schools, again, what Patrick said, you know, there's no chance, no shot. You're definitely, you know,
you're
capable of being in that environment,
right,
getting in.
So let's talk a little more about deciding between the two. And later let's talk about how to prepare and different aspects of that. But is there anything that we didn't talk about in terms of the two that we ought to clarify? One has science, you went through that.
Yeah, and I'm
maybe
sure.
The essay.
Yeah, the essay for the SAT this year is part of the exam. They are talking about some changes, but the ACT, it's optional. So that's something else you're going to want to think about. I do know some of the competitive schools are going to ask for an ACT test with the essay completed.
Okay.
So that's another thing to think about, is whether or not you want to take a test where you're going to showcase some of your writing abilities. Another thing to consider when deciding.
And some kids actually take a diagnostic of both exams, because that way they, and without preparing, not because they're going to use that score, but because they just want to see if one test just feels better to them.
Yeah, to get a baseline.
Right, because, for example, the SAT is very detailed, but the SAT actually punishes you for answering incorrectly.
Okay.
So as part of the SAT prep program, we really teach you to understand when you should guess and when you shouldn't guess. The ACT doesn't punish you. So if you're one of those kids who has to fill in every block, it's just part of who you are, you might actually think about taking the ACT, because at least it embraces that. We have students who come in and it's hard for them to learn to leave blanks. And so there'd be another factor. But there really are a variety of factors. As I said at the beginning, unless your school requires one or the other, there isn't a wrong answer, and there really isn't a right answer. They're both trying to do the same thing. And ultimately, if you prepare for them, they should show essentially how you're likely to perform in college.
Now, you said, let's go do one other thing first. I had read that there's subject, now I never did this, subject-based tests. Does that exist for both? And maybe we should say what that is, because I'm not explaining it very well.
I think you're talking about the subject tests, the
Exactly.
SAT subject tests.
Right, so it's only with the SAT that they have the specific subject test?
Yes, yeah, and it's just a test designated to that content area. So there's an SAT chemistry subject test. So it's another way for students to showcase their knowledge in a certain content area. And again, that's something to consider if you're looking at a specific school or you already have an idea of what area you want to study.
Yeah, there are certain schools that might require that, or
so they might
probably not a
require
requirement, they would prefer it.
Okay.
Because essentially, it provides a little more information about the student. Now, because someone who's going to take the chemistry subject matter test for SAT, in all likelihood did very well in chemistry, that grade is in their record, but this is now an objective test that the school might be a little more comfortable with, because they don't know, well, how hard does that teacher grade chemistry?
Right.
So that might be why that's a very school-specific issue,
Okay.
I think is a way to look at it. But it's yet another part of the process. But it isn't, just because you're taking the SAT, doesn't mean that you have to take any subject SAT
Okay.
test.
Now, is that ever required? You said it's sometimes?
It depends on the school.
Okay. So again,
it depends the program you want to go into.
Go to the website again.
Go to the school's website,
Yeah.
and they will answer that question directly, because if they want it, they'll make it very clear. The schools their websites are very good. They make it very clear what they expect. They know students are looking for this specific information, and they make it easy to find.
I want to go back to the writing a little bit one more time before we move on,
All right.
because I'm used to not be good at writing, and now I'm pretty good at writing. But that can be a difficult part of the test, I think, for many people, because from what I've heard of from professors at the university, a lot of students come in and they can't write very well at all. So any advice on that part?
Yeah, I think that not only is it maybe a student isn't ready to showcase writing abilities in general, but the SAT and the individuals that score the essays on the SAT test are looking for very particular types of writing. So I think the best way to address that, not so much be scared of it, is just prepare, know what to expect, know what those individuals scoring the SAT essays are looking for. And that's actually something that we do as part of our SAT program. We go over lots of examples of essays, and we try to show students and familiarize students with the types of writing. You have to think these people that are scoring the essays, they're looking at them for minutes. So they're looking for specific things, and it's it's not punctuation, it's not so much grammatical or spelling even. They're looking for specific types of writing. Yeah, they're looking for coherency. They're looking for certain examples, concrete examples, good supporting evidence. So it's just more about getting familiarized with the type of writing.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a magic word, diagnostic. It fit in there at one point, and let's go into that.
Okay.
We talked about what people need, and I think that's where we started, that Sylvan, your real mission is finding out what a student needs and trying to fix that.
Exactly.
So the diagnostic part, let's talk about that a little bit.
For the SAT and ACT, the first step we take is we have that student sit down and take a full SAT or ACT test.
And that's what, 3-4 hours?
It depends on the test. The SAT is 3.5, and I think the ACT is 3 3/4. So this way they're in that testing mode. And then we score it, and then we'll go through it with them to say, okay, here's how you tested without any preparation. So we know, like in the math section, if you're taking pre-calculus and this is testing you on algebra and geometry, we're not expecting that number to necessarily reflect your actual knowledge, but it may reflect your ability to get through the number of questions you have to get through in the amount of time. It starts to tell us a little bit about your time management. Overall, it's also telling us, well, where are you starting from? In the verbal section, That's not as subject focused the way as the math is. So that probably gives us a pretty good idea of where you're going to start from. And it might help us, it will help us, design the program so that it can focus on the areas you really need extra time for. In the beginning, we start with, we are assuming, in fact, we brought these books. This is the subject matter that's going to be covered with the SAT and the ACT. We start with a plan saying, okay, we're going to get through all the subject matter. But as we go through the course, we do this initial diagnostic. We will be doing 2 more diagnostic tests to really see, are there weaknesses we can start to spend some more time on. So as you go to the program, it'll be more personalized for you, because we say, okay, you're doing really well in math, but your verbal is not moving to where you want it to be. So you should be spending more time on the verbal section, reviewing the grammar rules. If your essays are not really aren't where you want them to be,
Especially if you're taking the SAT.
If you're taking the SAT, or sometimes people like, well, I'm a great writer, and you might be a good writer, but you haven't really learned to write in a way that's going to score well on the test. So then we'll say, let's do some additional work on essay writing.
I think that timing is really, for me, what I see the most when I see students come in. Seeing students take this test, they haven't seen anything like it before. Maybe they've taken the PSAT, which, it's a lot different than the SAT. I know parents, they'll call me in a panic, my student didn't do so well in the PSAT. That score might not be indicative of what they're going to do on the SAT. But the timing is a big deal. To see a student come in, take the test, and panic and say, oh my gosh, I didn't get to finish this. It's making them realize that they need to address certain strategies, or they need to be taught certain strategies. And I think that's the most information we get from those diagnostic exams. Yes, seeing what content area we need to focus on a little bit more, but also knowing what strategies we're going to focus on a little bit more. If it's a student that isn't able to finish all the questions, well, now we need to maybe work with a timer and get them in that mindset. What does it feel like to answer a question in 45 seconds? Or, this is what it feels like to get everything done in this time period.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have demonstrated that humans have no sense of time in terms of how much has gone by. If you just stopped and said, okay, I'm going to start my watch and stop it, and then you tell me how long that was, and people are just wildly off.
Yeah.
Right. But you become better at it if you practice, like anything. And so actually practicing getting through 25 questions in 15 minutes makes you more effective on getting through 25 questions in 15 minutes.
Right.
And that's the level of preparation that you need to do to really perform at your very best.
So the diagnostic is a great tool for you too.
It is a great tool, and it's an ongoing tool. It's not, we do start with that, but it is something that continues throughout the whole prep program.
Another way, just to add, that we use the diagnostic is our program, not to give too much away about it, but our program utilizes an online component too. So any questions that are answered incorrectly on the diagnostic exam or on the practice exams afterwards, those questions are then loaded onto the website. So students can go on the website in their free time, go over video tutorials of any questions they answered incorrectly, and go over video tutorials on skills that they're having trouble tackling based on what they're doing in the prep course.
So that seems like it would add to the variety of types of questions
Right.
that they're comfortable answering.
Exactly. Yeah, it gives them that added practice.
Of course, these are not the exact questions that they're going to get, so you're looking for an analytical ability that they can apply to different types of questions.
Yeah, it gives them the opportunity to practice some of these strategies, and it familiarizes them with the concepts. They're going to see the same concepts on the actual SAT or on the actual ACT. This is just kind of reinforcing those concepts and building their understanding conceptually.
This kind of difficult, I guess, to deal with, but some people are nervous with tests. I know from civil service tests that some people just can't take a test, but they can do the job. How do you deal with that?
Test anxiety is, a problem for everybody, and that's, I think, one of the biggest advantages to a test prep program is that you're anxious in part because you don't know how this is going to feel. You don't know what the questions are going to be, and if you haven't prepared, you don't even know what the instructions are going to say. And if you can knock some of those things down, so that you understand in this section, oh, I know what these instructions say. I don't really have to spend a lot of time with them. Or I understand how I get through 25 questions in 15 minutes. I know it's hard for me, but I know I can do it because I've already done it once. All of those things will reduce anxiety. Part of our program, we do address that because plenty of our students will be very clear about this. They're in 11th grade. By then, they know if they have test anxiety.
Right.
And they'll share it, and we'll talk to them about just acknowledge it and find different ways to do that. And actually, part of our job is to build their self-confidence, to point out to them, saying, listen, we are giving you the tools. You did that diagnostic, and you did it better. You did finish those 25 questions in 15 minutes, so don't worry about it. You know how to do it. We've given the tools, and that kind of experience and that kind of personal support really reduces the test anxiety. But a test is a test. We're all going to be anxious, and the goal really is to reduce the anxiety.
I would think that if you, like with a civil service test or any test, if you fail, it increases your anxiety for the next time. And so you're trying to get them to succeed. They know they can do it, as you said.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of anxiety comes from the unknown factors. That's what produces the most anxiety. So I think what we strive to do, and what we would encourage families to do, is to do the preparation so that way you're minimizing those unknown factors, and in turn you're minimizing the anxiety. And that's a lot of what you were saying,
Yep.
with familiarizing the students with the tests and the questions and giving them strategies that they can use to help minimize those unknown factors.
Right. I would assume that a lot of people who watch the show are going to be older, so they're going to be grandparents and parents more than young people who are maybe watching some other kind of show. But what kind of advice can you give to parents in terms of guidance for their children when they do reach the 11th grade and are thinking about these tests?
Well, I think, the first thing is you have to sit down with your child or your grandchild to really make sure they are focused on this. A lot of kids will stick their head in the sand as long as you let them. And so they're not going to think about college because it's really scary. And they're not going to think about the SAT, AC test because it's another test they don't want to take. And they know it's important, and so they're intimidated by it. And so you have to address it directly and say, okay, when are we going to take this test? The May test is the most popular test. We have classes.
Is it because much of their schoolwork is done? Or
No, it's just because it's a little bit of that. It just works in the academic schedule a little bit better, I think. But it also gives them an opportunity to take the test again in the fall if they want, before their applications are submitted. So they would be able to get 2 tries. Because you're allowed to send the best score to the school. You don't have to send, so if you do better the second time, you can send that one and the school never knows about the first time, and vice versa. So that's, I think, the primary reason why people do it in May. So you want to make sure the student's focused on this.
So what are the options? Is there a February one earlier, and then you could do a May and also a fall?
They're offered multiple times.
times.
Both tests are, actually. Right. And the best way to figure out what test you want to take is to go on the website, actstudent.org or collegeboard.org, and see the test dates. And they'll give you the registration deadlines. They're offered multiple times a year, usually fall, winter, spring, summer. Right. So there is a lot of variety there, and you might want to take the test earlier if you think you want to take it again to get a higher score. So I think this sitting down and figuring out
it out. Part of it is backwards scheduling. I mean, there are some students who know, even though they're juniors, they know from their senior class friends that some of those students found out that they were admitted by October, November. Well, the only way they did that was they submitted their applications in September and October.
Right.
And did early admission or early action. And the only way to do that is to have this SAT portion finished. So some of those people will have started in March, and so they then maybe take the second time in May, so that they can in fact have everything in place, ready to go. Other people say, no, I'm not ready, and so they do it. So there are a lot of factors into this. It's a lot of scheduling, but back to your earlier question, what parents and grandparents should do, it's really talking to the kid and helping them figure out how are they going to maneuver through this whole college application process, and starting junior year is right on time.
So when, I guess if the parent or caregiver was going to put this on their calendar to make sure that this decision is made, when would they do that?
Well, they would be speaking to their child now.
Okay.
Because
as
if
a
you're
junior?
as a junior, absolutely.
Okay.
If you're going to be taking a prep program, and for example, for the May exam, our prep program starts March 4th, I think, March 4th, in the first week of March.
The first week of March, yeah.
And our diagnostic is February 14th, although that's just a free day. Anybody can come in and do it. There's no obligation. But we have a diagnostic whenever it matters. But my point was that kids are starting to study for the exam at the beginning of March, so that they can take it in May, because juniors have got a very challenging academic school year.
Okay.
A lot of them have other activities, sports, and all sorts of.
Which is another
activities.
reason they don't want to think about this.
Exactly. Yeah. They're just really, really scheduled, and so to fit the hours you need to get through all these materials, you have to start early. We have some kids who are in sports who really who can't fit in the 4 hours a week we advise. And so they're actually starting now so that they can do it in 3 hours. Because our program will take 30 hours of instruction for the SAT and 26 hours for the ACT. In addition to those hours, there are the diagnostic testing days, which are separate days. And then they're expected to do some work at home. The work on the website we talked about, including a vocabulary builder. There are a lot of things to do. Kids only have so much time, and so the earlier you start to plan it out, the less anxiety everybody will have about
that's
it.
That's another way to reduce
anxiety is just figure out your schedule. And if you decide, you sit down now and you say to yourself, okay, we don't actually have to start this until March, that just allows you to relax in February. If you say, for whatever reason, we can't do this, we can't do the May exam, at least now you're making a decision rather than just having it happen, and in fall you're like, well, we're taking it now because we didn't take it then. I mean, I think the point...
Set a date. I mean, that seems like a real
We'll just start a process of figuring out what are your choices and what fits best in your life. Right. That's the point, and you want to start that conversation. And then the parents will, of course, also be talking to the kids about, okay, what college is right for you? Do you want to go to a competitive school? Do you want to go to a school in the area? Helping to narrow it down, not because you're deciding which schools to apply to right now, but you're starting to think about it. The schools will start sending you materials, emails, and in the mail. But
and I suppose if there are schools that you definitely want to think about, then go to their website and make sure that you're ready for that school.
Yeah,
exactly. You want to know what that school, because as I said at the beginning, if that school requires ACT, well, now you know which tests to take, and now you can look up to say, well, what days are that test being offered? And then if you're going to do a prep program, you can say, okay, how much time do I need to prepare for that test date, which is the one that works.
2 more questions.
Sure.
One, if you were a student and didn't want to pay anything, felt that you couldn't afford anything, just want to do the best you can on the test, what would you advise that person or the parents?
Oh, that's a good question.
I think ultimately, we have a test prep program, but there are books that are relatively inexpensive. Any preparation is better than no preparation.
Yeah, especially, vocabulary building, reading comprehension, that kind of thing. But yeah, there are lots of preparation books that they're not necessarily an arm and a leg to purchase.
And there are websites that are doing it as well. And libraries. Absolutely. There are a lot of places for you to get preparatory material. There are advantages for doing a formal class, but as you say,
that's my second question. What are the advantages?
The advantages, I think, are, one, you're not trying to pull together all this material. We have state-certified teachers going through this material with you. These are experienced teachers who know how to teach the math section.
And now you have options, right? There's a diagnostic, so somebody could do the diagnostic.
They could do diagnostic and full stop. If they do the diagnostic on February 14th, there's no cost, no obligation. Part of that is you'll come in and we'll go through the results, because just taking the test doesn't tell you anything. We'll go through the results with you, and if you don't want to sign up, that's fine.
Now, most of the people that see this, that will be passed.
Okay, those people can come in, take the diagnostic on a separate day. For that one, there's a $75 charge. And for that, you get the diagnostic, you'll sit with us, but you're not required to go forward with the program. If you do sign up for the program, the $75 is credited towards the price of the program.
And obviously, if you go through the program, you're going to have people helping you and making sure you're focused where you should be focused.
Yeah,
and you're going to have access to the My Sylvan website, which you have access to for a year.
For a year.
So you will do it for the program where you took the course, you have the books, you use My Sylvan, and then if you decide to take it a second time, we have some families who come to us and say, you know, I really just want to come for a few hours, and my child's just going to use the website to prepare for the second one. They really understand now what to do on their own. They still have the books. That's fine.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for coming. I think it was a lot of information. I hope people can make better decisions because
I
of
hope
it.
so too.
Thank you
Sure
for
they can.
having us.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you for having us.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show, that you tune in again next time, and that you have a great week. Take care. The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.